The courthouse smelled of dust, ink, and desperation. Ethan Graves stood in the doorway, his hat low on his brow, boots heavy with more than mud. Papers clutched in his hand trembled, though his grip was tight enough to snap bone. Foreclosure. His father's ranch, his birthright, was about to be carved up like beef at a butcher's counter. He swallowed hard, throat dry as prairie dirt. "I'd marry the devil himself," Ethan muttered under his breath, "if it meant keepin' the ranch." It wasn't just words. It was truth. And today, he was about to prove it. Ethan's story wasn't new in the West. The land was cruel, the skies stingy. 3 summers of drought had turned his pastures to cracked leather. Cattle that hadn't been rustled by thieves had simply wasted to bone. He worked day and night, back bent under sun and sorrow, but the numbers on the ledger only grew redder. His father had left him more than land, he'd left him pride. A name carved in sweat, blood, and grit. Ethan carried it like a badge, refusing to beg, refusing to bow. But pride didn't put hay in the barn. Pride didn't keep bankers from circling like buzzards. Now here he stood, boots echoing on courthouse boards, about to sell his soul for a scrap of salvation. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke. Behind a polished desk sat Mr. Claymore, the banker's lawyer, a thin man with eyes like a rattlesnake. He tapped a stack of papers, lips curling. "Mr. Graves," Claymore drawled, "there is another way." Ethan squinted. "Another way?" Claymore's smile was oil-slick. "Mary. That's all. A lady of means, wealthy, land-owning, eager for a husband. She takes your name, you take her ranch. 2 problems solved." Ethan barked a laugh, harsh and bitter. "So you're a matchmaker now? You expect me to marry some stranger just so I can keep my cattle from starvin'?" Claymore leaned in. "Not just any stranger. Martha Doyle. Owns the Doyle spread, good water, strong stock, fertile land. Twice the size of yours. She's, well, unconventional. But she's willing. Unconventional." Ethan knew what that meant in lawyers' talk. "Spit it out," he growled. Claymore's grin widened. "She's obese. A woman of considerable presence. Most men in this town wouldn't so much as tip their hat her way. But she's rich, Mr. Graves. And tired of bein' alone." Ethan's jaw tightened. He stared down at the ink-black words on the contract, heart pounding. His pride screamed no. But his father's ranch, his father's grave, whispered louder. That night, Ethan sat in the saloon, staring into a glass of whiskey he couldn't afford. The piano clanged in the corner, laughter sharp as knives. "You hear, Graves," a cowhand jeered. "Word is your Maureen, that Doyle woman. Rancher sold his soul for a cow of a wife." The table roared with laughter. Ethan's fist clenched around the glass, but he didn't rise. He couldn't. Because the rumor wasn't a lie, it was the truth. Tomorrow, he'd stand before a preacher and bind himself to Martha Doyle. He tried to drown the shame in whiskey, but shame floated. It never sank. Morning came with hard sunlight. Ethan waited outside the courthouse, hat low, boots restless. The street buzzed with whispers. Townsfolk lined the boardwalks, eager to witness the spectacle. Poor rancher weds the unwanted woman. Then she came. Martha Doyle wasn't what Ethan expected. Yes, she was large, broad-shouldered, with a frame that dwarfed most men. Her dress strained at the seams, and her bonnet looked like it had fought and lost a battle with the wind. But her eyes, sharp, green, unflinching, cut through him. She walked like a woman who'd long since stopped caring about whispers. "Mr. Graves," she said, voice steady as stone. "I suppose we're to be man and wife." Ethan tipped his hat, muttering, "Suppose so." Her gaze lingered, appraising him as though she were buying a horse. Then she smirked. "Don't worry, rancher. I don't bite. Unless you try to steal my cattle." The crowd chuckled, surprised by her boldness. Ethan flushed. He hadn't expected humor. He hadn't expected confidence. Inside, the preacher rattled through vows with the speed of a man late for supper. Ethan barely heard the words. He only heard his heartbeat, loud as hoofbeats in his ears. "Do you, Ethan Graves, take Martha Doyle?" He swallowed. "I do." "Do you, Martha Doyle, take Ethan Graves?" "I do," she said, crisp and clear. The preacher declared them husband and wife. There was no kiss, only a handshake. Her palm was warm, calloused like someone who worked harder than most men. Ethan blinked. This wasn't the soft, helpless woman he'd imagined. Her grip was firm, her smirk unyielding. And for the first time, a flicker of unease curled in his gut. Not fear. Not shame. Something stranger. Respect. That as they stepped outside, the townsfolk's laughter followed them down the street. Ethan clenched his jaw, bracing for humiliation. But Martha only lifted her chin higher, as if their scorn rolled off her like rain on tin. She leaned close, voice low enough for him alone. "You think you married me for land, Ethan Graves," she whispered. "But you don't know the half of it." Her green eyes flashed, daring, dangerous, unreadable. And for the first time, Ethan wondered if the devil's deal had been his, or hers. The morning sun burned gold over the Doyle Graves ranch, catching dust motes like tiny stars in the air. Ethan awoke stiff, back aching, pride bruised from yesterday's courthouse humiliation. The townsfolk had whispered, laughed, and pointed. Every step toward this new life felt heavier than his boots. And then he saw her. Martha Doyle. Already in the barn, sleeves rolled high, arms dusted with hay, commanding a team of ranch hands like she'd been born to lead them. Ethan felt something twist deep in his chest. Pride? Confusion? Something he couldn't name. Marriage had been quick. Their vows rushed. Their handshake formal. And now the reality hit like a runaway horse. Ethan, stubborn and proud, insisted on separate rooms. Martha laughed. "You can have your side," she said, tossing him a wink. "But the barn stays mine." Ethan gritted his teeth. Pride battled practicality. But even before he admitted it, he knew one thing: the woman moved faster than the rustlers who had stolen half his herd last summer. Her laughter rang across the corral as she whistled to the horses, gave orders, and corrected sloppy hands. Ethan tried to assert himself, stomping through the barn like a general. "Better watch your steps, Graves," Martha said. "Even a man with your stubbornness can trip over the obvious." He bristled, then paused. The obvious, he realized, had a name: Martha Doyle. Days blurred into work. Every corner of the ranch revealed her talents. She could handle cattle better than he ever could, calming wild bulls with a single word. Organize the staff, keeping them loyal, sharp, and productive. Balance the books with a keen eye, cutting costs without sacrificing the herd. She joked, too, cutting through the tension with humor. When Ethan tried to mend a fence himself, she leaned against the post, hands on hips. "You call that a fence?" she said, eyes glinting. "Even a drunk coyote could walk straighter. Here, let me show you." Days blurred into work. Every corner of the ranch revealed her talents. She could handle cattle better than he ever could, calming wild bulls with a single word. Organize the staff, keeping them loyal, sharp, and productive. Balance the books with a keen eye, cutting costs without sacrificing the herd. She joked, too, cutting through the tension with humor. When Ethan tried to mend a fence himself, she leaned against the post, hands on hips. "You call that a fence?" she said, eyes glinting. "Even a drunk coyote could walk straighter. Here, let me show you." Her laughter echoed as she repaired it in minutes. Ethan's jaw clenched. Pride clashed with admiration. At night, by the fire, he watched her. She didn't fit the town's shallow standards, but she fit the land perfectly. She was the storm that reshaped the ranch, the fire that burned the rot away. And she was untouchable. Of course, a partnership this intense was not without friction. Ethan's pride, long polished by solitude and struggle, bristled. "You're taking over my ranch," he snapped one evening, voice sharp as a whip. Martha leaned on the fence, arms crossed, grin teasing. "I'm saving it, you mean? And I'm doing it better than you could, Graves." They bickered in short, punchy exchanges, fast as gunfire in the summer heat. "Ethan, I've lived here my whole life. I know this land." "Martha, you thought you did. I know it now." "Ethan, you don't even. Martha, need to tell me twice. Trust me, rancher, I can handle more than talk." It wasn't hate. Not quite. It was fire meeting fire. And deep down, Ethan felt, awe. The first real test came with no warning. A herd of rustlers, emboldened by years of observing Ethan's weakness, descended on the ranch just before sunset. Smoke curled from torched fencing. Horses panicked. Cattle bellowed. The horizon burned pink with chaos. Ethan grabbed his rifle, arm trembling from an old injury, teeth gritted against fear and pride. He ran toward the corrals, only to see Martha already ahead. She barked orders, ran between men and bulls, her voice carrying over the chaos. "Calm the black steer. Take the calves out the north gate. Hold the gate, Sam. Don't let them through." Ethan froze, chest tight. She was fearless, commanding, not like a wife hiding behind walls, but a general on the front line. A rustler lunged at him. Ethan fired, barely hitting the man's hat. Martha swung a rope, yanking another intruder off a horse, flipping him onto the dusty ground. And still, she laughed. When the chaos finally settled, Ethan stood panting, sweat stinging his eyes. The rustlers had fled, leaving broken fences and scattered cattle. But not a single cow was lost, not a single hand injured beyond scrapes. Martha stood amidst the debris, chest heaving, hair matted with sweat, eyes shining with exhilaration. She turned, meeting Ethan's gaze. "You all right, rancher?" she asked, grin teasing. Ethan swallowed, feeling something foreign twist in his chest. Pride? Shame? Respect? Admiration? "All right," he said, voice rough. "Better than I thought I would be." She smirked. "Then maybe you'll finally see I'm more than land and fat jokes." And he did. Despite the day's terror, Martha didn't let gloom settle. That night, by the fire, she teased Ethan relentlessly. "You looked like a coyote trying to catch its tail back there," she said, shaking her head. "You think you're funny?" he growled, though a reluctant chuckle escaped. "I know I'm funny," she said, tossing him a piece of jerky. "And stronger than you. Don't worry, I'll let you keep the title of head rancher, just don't trip over it." Ethan laughed, finally, long and raw. For the first time, the ranch didn't feel like a prison. It felt like life. Messy, unpredictable, and terrifying, but alive. But peace was fleeting in the west. A week later, Ethan discovered signs, cattle tracks in the wrong direction, the telltale glint of gunmetal at dusk. Rustlers were not done. They were planning another raid, bigger this time, smarter. And Martha? She was already preparing, sharp as ever, reading the signs, making strategies. Ethan watched her, heart pounding. The woman he thought he married for land was turning the ranch into a fortress. She was a storm he couldn't control, a fire he didn't want to. And deep down, he knew one thing: he might survive the rustlers, but he wouldn't survive underestimating Martha Doyle. The storm came without warning. Thick clouds swallowed the sun, turning the horizon gray as ashes. Rain pelted the Doyle Graves ranch like 100 fists, drumming on the tin roofs and pounding the dusty earth into mud. Ethan Graves huddled in the barn, watching Martha move among the livestock with a calm precision that made him both anxious and awed. Her figure, broad and unyielding, was a study in motion, strong arms steadying calves, boots splashing through mud, voice cutting through the chaos. She was fearless. And Ethan, was not that in the past week, he had begun to see her differently. The townsfolk's mocking whispers, Graves married a whale for land, had faded into a dull hum. Instead, he noticed how she anticipated the cattle's every move, how she handled the hands with humor and authority, how she never hesitated to wade into danger. Still, his pride bristled like a spooked stallion. He wanted to admire her quietly, secretly, but the knowledge that the world would never see her as he did, never acknowledge her, gnawed at him. "You're staring again," she said, tossing him a hay fork. Rain drenched her hair, but her grin was untamed. "I'm assessing your strategy," he muttered, swallowing. Martha laughed, a sound bright and fearless even over the storm. "Sure you are, rancher. But don't overthink it. Just hold on." Ethan realized he had no words to respond, only a growing ache in his chest, a strange, frightening mix of admiration, fear, and something else. That night, the storm raging like a drumbeat on the roof, Martha invited Ethan to sit near the fireplace. The firelight flickered, casting shadows that danced across her face, softening the sharp edges of yesterday's battles. For the first time, she seemed human, fragile even, despite her formidable presence. "I suppose you married me for the ranch," she said, voice low, not accusing, just stating. Ethan's jaw tightened. I did what I had to do." Her gaze softened, and she leaned back. "I understand. You thought I was a means to an end, just like I thought you were a man desperate enough to marry anything with a pulse. We both misjudged." She paused, eyes glinting with the reflection of flames. "But there's more you don't know. People laughed at me my whole life, Ethan. Men used me for money, women envied me for wealth. I learned early that power, not appearance, keeps you alive in this world. The ranch, it's not just land. It's control. It's my shield." Ethan listened, heart tightening. Every word she spoke carved away at his preconceptions. He had thought her laughable, he had thought her shallow, he had thought he'd simply married her to save his family's name. Now he saw a survivor, someone who had endured every cruelty and come out sharper, fiercer, more alive. For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, the storm raged, but inside the small room, something gentler stirred, a shared understanding. That night, the storm raging like a drumbeat on the roof, Martha invited Ethan to sit near the fireplace. The firelight flickered, casting shadows that danced across her face, softening the sharp edges of yesterday's battles. For the first time, she seemed human, fragile even, despite her formidable presence. "I suppose you married me for the ranch," she said, voice low, not accusing, just stating. Ethan's jaw tightened. I did what I had to do." Her gaze softened, and she leaned back. "I understand. You thought I was a means to an end, just like I thought you were a man desperate enough to marry anything with a pulse. We both misjudged." She paused, eyes glinting with the reflection of flames. "But there's more you don't know. People laughed at me my whole life, Ethan. Men used me for money, women envied me for wealth. I learned early that power, not appearance, keeps you alive in this world. The ranch, it's not just land. It's control. It's my shield." Ethan listened, heart tightening. Every word she spoke carved away at his preconceptions. He had thought her laughable, he had thought her shallow, he had thought he'd simply married her to save his family's name. Now he saw a survivor, someone who had endured every cruelty and come out sharper, fiercer, more alive. For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, the storm raged, but inside the small room, something gentler stirred, a shared understanding. Days passed, the storm giving way to sun, but the memory lingered. Ethan found himself noticing small things, how her hands moved, deft and strong, how her laughter could cut through any tension, how her eyes held secrets and triumphs alike. One evening, trapped in the main house by an unexpected thunderstorm, they found themselves alone, the room smelling of wet wood and smoke. Lightning illuminated Martha's face, casting fleeting shadows that made her seem both formidable and tender. "You're different," Ethan said quietly, almost a whisper. "Than anyone I've ever met." She smiled, not mockingly, but softly. "And you're finally starting to see it, aren't you?" He swallowed, caught between fear and desire, pride and truth. Short sentences tumbled from him like bullets. I didn't expect this. I didn't think I'd respect a woman like you. Hell, I didn't even think I'd." His voice faltered. Her hand brushed his, accidental, lingering, electric. He felt the heat of her skin through his calloused fingers. "You can finish your thought tomorrow, rancher," she said, a teasing glint in her eye, "if the cattle don't get to it first." And just like that, tension dissolved into something more dangerous, more intimate. Ethan realized the storm outside was nothing compared to the one brewing inside him. Just as Ethan began to trust his heart, danger returned. Rustlers had scouted the ranch, biding their time. One evening, under the cover of darkness, smoke curled over the north fence, and horses stamped in panic. Ethan grabbed his rifle, adrenaline spiking. But Martha was already in motion. She climbed onto her horse, voice sharp and commanding. "Sam, block the gate. Lily, bring the calves to the east pasture. Watch the western fence. Don't let them through." Ethan felt his pride buckle under awe. He realized she didn't just handle the ranch, she commanded it, mastered it, protected it like a lioness protecting her cubs. The rustlers charged, but Martha, fearless and precise, directed every move. Ethan fired his rifle, but it was her strategy that saved the herd. She chased down one rustler with a rope, flipped another off his horse, and still managed to shout instructions to the frightened hands. After the dust settled, Ethan found himself drenched, exhausted, and wholly unashamed to admit it. He was in awe of her. Days later, Ethan sat on the porch, watching Martha work. The sun gilded her figure in gold, the cattle grazing peacefully thanks to her efforts. He realized something that terrified and thrilled him: he didn't care what the townsfolk thought anymore. She had transformed his ranch. She had transformed him. Pride, stubbornness, and ego, they all seemed petty now. He had married for land, yes, but he was staying for something far rarer: respect, partnership, and perhaps, in the quiet moments when she smiled at him, love. Ethan understood that his heart had shifted, subtly but irrevocably. And in that quiet understanding, he felt both vulnerable and alive, but the West was never gentle for long. Rumors of a larger rustler gang reached them by noon. They were smarter, faster, and hungrier than before. And this time, the attack would not be a mere test, it would be a reckoning. Martha, undeterred, was already planning defenses, while Ethan stood behind her, rifle in hand, feeling something strange: he would follow her anywhere. As she met his gaze, eyes bright with fire and courage, she smirked, teasing yet deadly serious. "You thought the first fight was the worst, rancher. The real storm is coming. And if you want to survive it, you'd better be ready to change." Ethan swallowed, heart hammering. He wasn't ready, none of them were. But one truth had settled in his chest like a brand. He was no longer the man who walked into the courthouse with desperation. He was a man standing beside Martha Doyle, and that was far more dangerous, and exhilarating, than anything he had ever faced. The horizon burned orange and red as the sun sank, casting long shadows over the Doyle-Graves ranch. The air smelled of smoke, wet earth, and the faint tang of fear. Ethan Graves stood on the porch, rifle slung over his shoulder, boots sinking into the muddy ground. His pulse raced, not just from the approaching rustlers, but from the realization that nothing in his life had prepared him for the woman he married. Martha Doyle rode up beside him, saddle creaking, eyes bright and steady. She wore the dirt and sweat of battle like armor, her hair plastered to her forehead, but her grin was untouchable. "Ready, rancher?" she asked, voice cutting through the wind. Ethan swallowed, feeling pride and awe clash in equal measure. "As ready as I'll ever be." The rustlers struck as night fell. Shadows moved like predators, and the air was pierced with the shriek of frightened horses. Ethan fired blindly, heart pounding. A figure charged into view, Martha, fearless, lasso in hand. She flipped a rustler from his horse, rolled to her feet, and barked commands to the ranch hands. "Hold the north gate. Don't let them through. Get the calves to the back pasture, now." Ethan felt his world narrow, every sense on high alert. Sparks of gunfire reflected off tin roofs. Horses screamed. Dust swirled like smoke from hell. He realized, amid the chaos, that this was not a battle for land. This was a battle for life, and for each other. Martha was everywhere at once, directing men, swinging ropes, firing shots, moving like a storm incarnate. Ethan fought beside her, finally admitting to himself that she was not a burden or a joke, she was his partner in every sense. Minutes felt like hours. The rustlers had underestimated them, and that was their mistake. Martha, fierce and strategic, anticipated every move. Ethan blocked one intruder, then another, his mind and body moving with a new rhythm, fueled by determination and awe. Martha disarmed one man with a swift strike of her rifles, but she guided frightened calves to safety while Ethan kept the gate secure. Sparks of fire from the barn's edge illuminated her silhouette, a warrior who had never belonged to anyone, until now. When the last rustler fled into the night, the ranch lay in chaos, but intact. Ethan stood panting, mud and blood on his hands, and looked at Martha. She was bruised, sweating, but smiling. "You did well, rancher," she said, voice teasing but soft. Ethan's chest tightened. "No. We did well," he corrected. For the first time, he meant it fully. That night, the firelight flickered across the main house. Ethan and Martha sat side by side, silence stretching before them like a fragile bridge. He took her hand, calloused and strong, in his own. "I married you for land," he admitted, voice low, almost ashamed. "But I stayed for you. For this, everything you are. I was blind, proud, foolish, and now I see. I can't imagine this ranch, or my life, without you." Martha's eyes shimmered. She squeezed his hand, not a tear of weakness, but of release and understanding. "You thought I was just a way to an end," she said. "But the truth is, I found someone who could see me, not just the land. And that's worth more than all the acres in the world." Ethan leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers. In the flickering firelight, he saw every battle, every challenge, every scar she carried, and loved her all the more for it. In the days that followed, the Doyle Graves ranch slowly healed. Fences were repaired. The cattle grazed peacefully. Townsfolk whispered less, and when they laughed, Ethan no longer cared. Pride had been replaced by humility, fear by courage, and loneliness by partnership. Ethan finally called her his wife, openly, in front of anyone who doubted. Martha laughed, a full, unstoppable laugh that made him feel lighter than he had in years. They worked side by side, rebuilding not just the land, but themselves. Ethan realized that love, like a ranch, required sweat, patience, and the willingness to face storms together. And together, they were unstoppable. The sun rose again over the Doyle Graves ranch, gold spilling across the fields like a promise. Ethan Graves had thought he married for land. And in a way, he had. But what he gained was far greater, a woman who could tame his pride, challenge his strength, and ignite his heart. Some men marry for gold, some for survival. Ethan married for land, yes. But he stayed for Martha Doyle, the woman who transformed his life, his ranch, and his heart. Life in the Wild West was cruel, unforgiving, and unpredictable. But with Martha by his side, it was worth every battle, every laugh, and every storm. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done if you were in Ethan Graves' boots? And tell us, have you ever underestimated someone and been completely surprised by their strength?